Egypt was left bleeding and fractured after 9 years of terror and divine plague. The golden city of Memphis stood in silent ruin, its streets scarred by fire and the heavy footsteps of a desperate rebellion. The old pharaoh was gone, but the ghost of his paranoia still haunted the palaces and temples. Into this ash-filled world stepped the new ruler, Pharaoh Qa'a, carrying the weight of a dying dynasty on his young shoulders. He did not inherit a glorious empire, he inherited a burning cage that he desperately needed to escape. Pharaoh Qa'a knew that raw force alone could not heal a kingdom torn apart by civil war. To win back the hearts of his furious subjects and the powerful priesthood, he made a calculated, brilliant political move. He ordered his royal artisans to restore the desecrated monuments of his ancestors, specifically King Anajib, whose legacy had been brutally erased. By carving these forgotten names back into history, Qa'a positioned himself not as a tyrant, but as a restorer of sacred cosmic order. This masterstroke silenced the northern rebels and brought a fragile, long-awaited peace to the fractured Nile Valley. With the rebellion successfully crushed by diplomacy, Egypt entered a sudden and magnificent golden era of architectural restoration. For the first time in over a decade, the sounds of war were completely replaced by the heavy thud of stone-cutting blocks. Qa'a funded massive building projects across the sacred sites of the land, proving to his people that the gods had finally smiled upon them once more. Wealth and resources began to flow back into the royal treasury as trade routes with distant lands were quickly re-established. The new pharaoh had successfully transformed himself from a ruler of ash into a magnificent builder of monuments. Decades rolled by like the steady, predictable flooding of the Nile, cementing Qa'a as one of the longest ruling kings of the First Dynasty. For 33 remarkable years, he governed his empire with a wise, steady hand, far removed from the bloody chaos of his youth. The terrifying plagues and widespread famines that had defined his predecessor's reign became nothing more than distant, fading nightmares told to children. Yet, as the old pharaoh felt his own mortal strength beginning to slip away, his thoughts inevitably turned toward the grand underworld. He knew he had to build a final resting place at Abydos that would surpass everything that came before. At the sacred, wind-swept sands of Abydos, a monumental project of unprecedented scale began to take shape under the blazing sun. Qa'a's final tomb was designed to be an absolute masterpiece of mud brick architecture, a sprawling underground palace for his eternal soul. The deep burial chamber alone was built to be exceptionally large, surrounded by a complex labyrinth of storage rooms meant to hold vast treasures. This was not just a simple grave, it was a physical manifestation of a highly stable and wealthy empire capable of moving mountains of earth. But as the external walls rose higher, a dark, ancient tradition cast a long, terrifying shadow over the construction site. For generations, the pharaohs of the First Dynasty held a terrifying belief that they could not enter the afterlife completely alone. It was an unwritten, bloody law that a king's closest servants, guards, and concubines had to be sacrificed to serve him in eternity. In the previous reign of Semerkhet, over 50 innocent souls had been dragged into the dark earth on the very day of the royal funeral. Now, as Qa'a approached his final hours, the high priests prepared the ritual daggers and the lethal poisons, expecting the same bloody tribute. The entire royal court waited in absolute terror, wondering who among them would be chosen to die. Lying on his deathbed, surrounded by the solemn whispers of his weeping court, the old pharaoh looked into the eyes of his terrified servants. The high priest stepped forward, ready to initiate the ancient, horrific ritual of retainer sacrifice that had stained Egypt's history for centuries. But with his very last ounce of strength, Qa'a raised his hand and spoke a command that completely shocked the entire temple hierarchy. He decreed that no blood would be spilled upon his death, and no living soul would be forced into the dark grave alongside him. He would face the gods of the underworld entirely alone, breaking a centuries-old curse with a single, merciful breath. When the great Pharaoh Qa'a finally closed his eyes forever, he was carried to his massive tomb at Abydos in absolute peace. Unlike the funerals of the past, there were no horrific screams of agony, no forced poisonings, and no desperate weeping of doomed servants. His sprawling burial complex was sealed with royal clay stamps, completely empty of the traditional subsidiary graves that had defined the dynasty. Only 26 small, pre-prepared symbolic rooms remained, a massive reduction that proved the ancient, bloody tradition had been broken. The tomb was covered by the desert sands, leaving behind a legacy of unexpected mercy that future generations would never forget. Thousands of years later, modern archaeologists digging in the sacred sands of Abydos uncovered the grand burial complex of Pharaoh Qa'a. As they carefully brushed away the heavy layers of time, they found a beautiful, large limestone stela bearing his royal name. Expecting to find the traditional mass graves of sacrificed servants that defined the First Dynasty, the researchers were left completely stunned by what they saw. The architecture revealed a massive, deliberate shift away from the horrific human sacrifices of the earlier pharaohs. Qa'a's tomb stood as an undeniable archaeological turning point, proving that a major religious and social revolution had quietly taken place. With the peaceful passing of Pharaoh Qa'a, the curtain finally came down on the legendary and turbulent First Dynasty of Egypt. He had ruled for over 3 decades, successfully guiding his nation from the brink of total collapse into an era of stability. By ending the terrifying practice of human sacrifice, he completely reshaped the spiritual future of the kingdom, paving the way for the Grand Pyramid builders. His name would be recorded as the last king of a bloody, foundational era that forged the very identity of Egypt. The First Dynasty was over, but the immortal echo of its final, merciful would ring through the halls of history forever.